Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. My father died and left me nothing, or so my stepmother said. His attorney called 3 weeks later. My father had a silent partnership in a pharmacy chain. His share was mine. Stay close. Because the inheritance that changes everything isn't always in the will. Sometimes it's in a partnership agreement that the person who inherits the paperwork never thought to mention. We know our parents as roles, provider, protector, the person at the head of the table, and we rarely know them as business people, as risk takers, as the quietly ambitious person they were before we were old enough to ask. Margaret Sato learned who her father was only after his death. She learned it from an attorney she had never met in a conference room in Pittsburgh, holding a partnership agreement with her father's signature at the bottom. This is a story about a man who said nothing and said everything. Margaret Sato is 44 years old, a pharmaceutical compliance analyst, which is a profession she arrived at through the particular route of people who find a field that suits both their precision and their values and stay in it long enough to become genuinely good at it. She grew up in Pittsburgh's Squirrel Hill neighborhood, the urban, walkable, residential intellectual neighborhood that has a particular character among Pittsburgh's distinct neighborhoods, and attended Carnegie Mellon for her undergraduate degree and returned to Pittsburgh for her career, with the quiet intention of someone who has evaluated the alternatives and chosen the familiar for reasons that have nothing to do with a failure of imagination. Her father, Robert Sato, was a pharmacist. He had owned a small independent pharmacy in Squirrel Hill for 30 years, managed it with the specific attention to detail that pharmacy demands, and sold it 12 years before he died. He had, in the period before the sale, invested the proceeds in various instruments. Margaret had known this in the vague way that adult children know the financial facts their parents mention without elaboration. He had occasionally referred to the pharmacy investment in conversation. He had not elaborated. He was not an elaborating man. Robert was private about money, not secretive, exactly, not hidden, not evasive, but private in the way of people who have worked for what they have and who treat financial detail as a personal matter rather than a family conversation. He paid his bills, he made his investments, he managed his affairs. He did not provide a running commentary on the state of his finances to his adult daughter, any more than he would have expected her to provide a running commentary on hers to him. What he had done, with the same quiet deliberateness that governed every other financial decision he made, was include a succession clause in the limited partnership agreement he had signed 30 years ago when he became a silent partner in Keystone Pharmacy Partners. The clause named his daughter. He had updated it 6 years ago in the attorney's office as part of a routine review of the partnership documentation. He had not mentioned this update to Margaret. He had not mentioned it to Patricia. He had simply updated the succession designation and filed the updated agreement with the partnership's attorney of record and gone home. Patricia Sato is 58 years old and had been Robert's second wife for 12 years at the time of his death. She is a practical woman, organized, deliberate, the kind of person who manages household finances competently, and who had, in the last 4 years of Robert's illness, taken over the management of his accounts and correspondence. She had been authorized to do so. She had done so competently. She had also, in the weeks between Robert's death and the probate proceedings, prepared an asset schedule with the assistance of her attorney that listed the estate assets: the house, the savings account, 2 vehicles, a pension, not the partnership. Margaret had attended the probate proceedings. She had asked, quietly, about the pharmacy investment she remembered her father mentioning. Patricia had said, "That was years ago. It didn't amount to anything." Margaret had accepted this. She was grieving. She was managing her own relationship to her father's death, the particular grief of adult children who had a relationship with a parent that was affectionate but not close in the daily sense, who realize in the weeks after the death that what they grieve is both the person and the conversation they never had time to finish. She was not, in that period, in a position to interrogate her stepmother's characterization of an investment that she herself knew almost nothing about. She accepted what Patricia said. She went home. 3 weeks later, the padded envelope arrived. The envelope was from the law firm of Cheng, Lau & Webb, Pittsburgh, a business law firm in the downtown legal district that Margaret had not heard of before this moment. The envelope was addressed to her directly, at her apartment in Squirrel Hill. Inside, a cover letter from Vincent Lau, attorney of record for Keystone Pharmacy Partners, explaining that he was contacting her as the named heir per the partnership agreement's succession clause, and that he had assumed she had already been in contact with the estate attorney. She had not been. She read the cover letter twice. She opened the attached document. The limited partnership agreement was thick, spiral-bound, produced by a business attorney. The kind of document that most people would look at and set down after page 2. Margaret Sato is a pharmaceutical compliance analyst. She reads regulatory documents for a living. She turned to page 14. Page 14 contained the succession clause. It named Margaret Yuki Sato, specifically and directly, as the successor to Robert Sato's 18% limited partnership interest in Keystone Pharmacy Partners upon his death. The clause was clear. The date of the last update was 6 years ago. The appraised value of the 18% interest, per the cover letter, was $1.62 million. Quarterly distributions were to commence within 60 days of succession confirmation. She read the clause 4 times. Then she called Vincent Lau. He answered on the second ring. She identified herself. He said, "I'm glad you called. I assumed you'd already spoken with the estate attorney." She said, "I had not." He said, "I see." She said, "Can you tell me about the partnership?" He said, "I can tell you everything. Can you come in?" She went the next morning. Vincent Lau is 52 years old and has been practicing estate and partnership law in Pittsburgh for 25 years. He is the kind of attorney who keeps files in careful order and who had in this instance been waiting for a call that he had expected to receive before the funeral and had not. He had reviewed the estate filing when it was made available through normal channels and had noticed the absence of the partnership interest. He had assumed the succession would be handled through the estate attorney. When no contact came, he had sent the padded envelope. He was relieved to have a response. He explained the partnership structure. Keystone Pharmacy Partners was a 6-location pharmacy group operating in Pittsburgh and its eastern suburbs. Robert had become a limited silent partner 30 years ago. The investment had been made with the proceeds of an earlier business venture Margaret had not known about, a small real estate holding Robert had sold in the late 1980s. The partnership had grown steadily over 3 decades. Robert's 18% was currently appraised at $1.62 million. The quarterly distribution for the most recent quarter was $38,400, which would be paid to the successor once the succession was confirmed. Margaret listened to all of this with the specific attention of someone who is simultaneously receiving information and processing its implications, and who has learned, in 20 years of professional life, to do both at once without letting the processing interfere with the receiving. She took notes. She asked clarifying questions. She confirmed the succession clause's language and its legal effect under Pennsylvania statute. She thanked Vincent and said she would retain him for the succession process. She drove home. She called Patricia. Patricia answered after 3 rings. Margaret said, "I received a letter from the partnership attorney. My father named me as successor on an 18% stake in Keystone Pharmacy Partners." There was a pause. Patricia said, "That was your father's private investment. He never wanted to involve the family." Margaret said, "He named me as successor 6 years ago." Patricia said, "I'd want to speak with an attorney before any of this moves forward." Margaret said, "I've already spoken with one." Patricia said softly, "Margaret, don't do this." Margaret said, "I'm not doing anything. My father already did it." She ended the call. She sat with the partnership agreement on her kitchen table. She read page 14 again. She thought about her father, not the father of the probate period, not the father of the illness, but the father she had grown up watching manage the pharmacy in Squirrel Hill with the methodical precision of someone who understands that small details have large consequences. She thought about his version of carefulness, the version she had tried to emulate professionally, the version that had led her to pharmaceutical compliance work, the version that showed up in the way he organized his files and his inventory and his accounts, with a consistency that she had absorbed as a child without knowing she was absorbing it. He had been careful about this too. He had updated the succession clause 6 years ago. He had named her. He had not mentioned it. She did not yet know why, whether it was privateness or a desire not to create family conflict, or simply the assumption that the document would speak for itself when it needed to. She was beginning to think it was the last thing. Let me describe the procedural sequence, because it had several parts, and Patricia was more deliberate in her response than Margaret had anticipated. Patricia's attorney filed a complaint in Allegheny County Orphans Court within 2 weeks of the succession notice. The argument was structured. Robert's failure to disclose the partnership interest in the estate schedule constituted a deficiency in the estate filing that required correction, and the partnership interest should be included in the estate for equitable distribution between the surviving spouse and the named heir. It was a coherent legal argument. It was also an argument that required the court to override an express succession clause in a valid partnership agreement, and to characterize a non-probate instrument as a probate asset. Vincent's response was grounded in Pennsylvania Consolidated Statutes Title 20, which governs non-probate transfers. Limited partnership interests with express succession clauses are treated under Pennsylvania law as non-probate assets, in the same legal category as beneficiary designated accounts, payable on death instruments, and transfer on death securities. They do not pass through probate. They are not subject to the estate distribution rules that govern probate assets. The succession clause in Robert's partnership agreement was a valid, legally governed mechanism for transferring the interest directly to Margaret at the moment of his death, independent of the will and independent of the probate estate. Barbara Cheng, the managing partner of Keystone Pharmacy Partners, submitted a declaration confirming the partnership's position. The succession clause was clear. The succession notice had been properly filed, and Keystone had no authority to delay the succession pending a probate dispute. She also confirmed the date of the succession designation update, 6 years ago, and the specific language of the clause, which named Margaret by her full legal name, Margaret Yuki Sato. Patricia's attorney requested a continuance to conduct discovery on whether Robert had intended the partnership as marital property. The orphans' court granted 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, Margaret learned several things about her father's business history that she had not known. Vincent, reviewing the partnership records, described the original investment, the real estate venture from the 1980s, the sale proceeds, the decision to invest in the pharmacy group. He described Robert's relationship with Barbara Chang and the other founding partners. A professional relationship of 30 years, built on the specific trust of people who have shared a business venture through multiple economic cycles and who have remained aligned in their management of it. He described Robert as a quiet partner who attended the annual meetings consistently, asked precise questions about the financial reports, and generally deferred to the managing partners on operational matters while remaining attentive to the investment's trajectory. Margaret had not known any of this. She had known a pharmacist in Squirrel Hill. She had known a father who took her to Kennywood every summer and who explained things patiently, and who had the specific quality of fathers who show their love through reliable presence rather than demonstrated emotion. She had not known a businessman who had been building a 30-year investment that he intended to pass directly to his daughter at the moment of his death, in a document that was designed to arrive 3 weeks after his funeral in a padded envelope from an attorney's office. She thought, he planned this. He knew the envelope would come. He knew Vincent would send it. He knew I would read page 14. She did not say this to Vincent. She said it to herself, quietly in the kitchen of her apartment in Squirrel Hill, with the partnership agreement still on the table and the padded envelope beside it. The orphans' court hearing was held on a gray Tuesday in November. Margaret came. She did not ask to be in the courtroom. She asked to wait in the hallway, which is not an unusual request, and which Harriet, had she been present, might have recognized as the choice of someone who understands what the document already contains and prefers not to watch the ceremony of its acknowledgement. Vincent represented her. She was in the hallway with a cup of coffee from the cart near the building entrance, and the same careful stillness she brought to meetings where she was waiting for a regulatory outcome she had already analyzed and found to be clear. Patricia's attorney made the final argument. Vincent presented the partnership agreement, the Pennsylvania statute, and Barbara Chang's declaration. He noted, specifically, that Robert had updated the succession designation 6 years ago, 2 years after marrying Patricia, and had specifically named Margaret in the updated clause. This was not an original designation that had been overlooked. This was a deliberate update, made years into the second marriage, to a document that Robert had specifically reviewed and confirmed. Patricia was in the courtroom. She looked at the succession clause. She looked at the date of the update, 6 years ago, 2 years into her marriage to Robert. She had been with him when he updated it. She had not known, at the time, that the update was to the succession clause. She had been told it was a routine document review. Her attorney said, "Your Honor, we withdraw the objection." The judge confirmed the succession. Vincent came out of the courtroom and found Margaret in the hallway. He said, "It's done." She said, "He knew." Vincent said, "He did." She said, "He knew she'd try." Vincent said, "He left you what he intended to leave you." She said, "He didn't say a word about it." Vincent said, "No, he didn't have to." She thought about this on the drive back to Squirrel Hill. She thought about her father's version of speech, the version that worked through documentation rather than declaration, through the careful maintenance of a succession clause in a business agreement rather than a conversation at a kitchen table. He had not told her about the partnership. He had not explained his reasoning. He had simply updated the clause and trusted the envelope to arrive. She does not fully understand why he kept it quiet during his life. She has developed theories that he wanted the partnership to be hers without the weight of expectation, that he wanted to spare her the complications of a conversation about Patricia and the estate, that he simply found the document more reliable than the conversation and preferred to let the document speak. She has not found an answer she is entirely satisfied with. She may not find one. He is gone, and the document says what it says, and what it says is sufficient. The first quarterly distribution, $38,400, arrived 60 days after the succession was confirmed. It arrived by direct deposit to the account she had opened at the same regional bank her father had used for 30 years. She looked at the deposit notification for a long time. Then she called the bank to confirm the account details were correct. They were. She set the phone down and looked out the kitchen window at the Squirrel Hill street below, which was the same street she had grown up looking at from a window 2 blocks over. She did not spend the distribution immediately. She put it in the new account and let it sit. She was not ready to decide what the money meant yet. She was still deciding what her father meant, the version of him she was learning posthumously through a spiral-bound partnership agreement on her kitchen table. She keeps the agreement in a padded envelope in her home office, the same padded envelope it arrived in. Because the padded envelope has Robert's address on the front and the law firm's printed label, and she is not ready to remove that. The envelope sits on the shelf above her desk, between a pharmaceutical regulatory reference guide and a framed photograph of her father behind the counter of the Squirrel Hill Pharmacy, the year before he sold it. She has not read beyond page 14. She will. She is a compliance analyst. She will eventually read the whole document with the same systematic attention she gives to regulatory submissions, every section, every exhibit, every defined term. She knows this about herself. She is simply not there yet. She is still on page 14, with her name in the succession clause and the date of the update that tells her what her father decided 2 years into his second marriage, that this was hers, and that he had the means to make it so, and that a document was more reliable than a conversation for the kind of thing that needed to remain clear after he was gone. She thinks about that. She thinks about it in the evenings when she walks through Squirrel Hill after work, the neighborhood she grew up in, still lived in, still knows in the deep-grained way you know places you have inhabited for your whole life. She walks past the block where the pharmacy was. The space is a coffee shop now. The fade has been updated, but the building is the same building, and the window is the same proportion, and she knows, walking past it, that her father spent 30 years behind that window managing a small, careful, precise operation that he understood completely and from which he funded the investment that, 30 years later, arrived in a padded envelope with her name on page 14. She thinks, he knew this place, he built something from it, and when it was time to decide who the something was for, he wrote her name. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The document said it. The document still says it. She reads it when she needs to remember what he decided. She thinks that is how he would have wanted it to work. Sometimes the most important thing a parent does isn't the conversation they had. It's the document they signed. The document does the talking when they are no longer able to. Thank you for listening today. Leave your city in the comments. And if this story made you think of a document you should look for, or a conversation about an estate you should have while the person is still there to have it, please have that conversation. Don't wait for the padded envelope. I'll see you next time. Let me tell you about Robert Sato more specifically, because the kind of man he was is the explanation for everything else in this story. Robert was born in Pittsburgh in 1948, the second son of Japanese immigrants who had arrived in western Pennsylvania in the late 1930s, and who had navigated the particular difficulties of that decade, the internment that had taken other families, the economic marginalization, the deliberate quiet of people who have learned that visibility sometimes costs more than invisibility provides. His parents were not destroyed by the difficulties of their time. They were organized by them. They became, as people who survive systematic precariousness sometimes become, people with an acute sense of the importance of documentation, of formal legal standing, of the specific protections that a recorded and witnessed and properly filed instrument provides against the world's informal preferences. Robert absorbed this. He grew up in the post-war Pittsburgh of economic expansion and neighborhood solidification, and he absorbed his parents' relationship to paperwork, the understanding that your legal position was only as strong as the documents that described it, and that the documents needed to be correct and kept and findable. He became a pharmacist, in part because pharmacy combined the precision he valued with a professional structure that was legally and ethically defined, in which the documentation requirements were both rigorous and consequential. He was good at it. He practiced for 30 years. He was also, in a quiet way that his family did not fully know, a businessman. The real estate venture of the 1980s, a small commercial property in the eastern suburbs that he had purchased with accumulated savings and sold 9 years later at a significant gain, had taught him that capital could compound if it was placed correctly and left alone. He had taken the gain and placed it in the pharmacy group partnership, which he had been invited to join by Barbara Cheng, a woman he had known professionally for a decade and whose business acumen he respected. He had joined as a silent limited partner. He had done this without consulting Patricia, who was, at that point, not yet in his life. He had joined the partnership before his first wife left, before Margaret was a teenager, in a year when the partnership had seemed like a solid long-term investment, and the alternative was a savings account that would erode to inflation. He had been right. The partnership had grown steadily. The pharmacy group had expanded from 2 locations to 6 over 3 decades, and the appraisal of Robert's 18% had grown commensurately. By the time of his death, the stake was worth $1.62 million. He had been collecting quarterly distributions for 30 years. He had put them, quietly, into the same regional bank account he had always maintained. Margaret had not known about the bank account. Patricia had discovered the bank account 4 years before Robert's death, when she took over the management of his correspondence and bills. She had not, in her telling, immediately understood that the deposits were partnership distributions. Robert had labeled them in his personal accounting as KPP Quarterly, which she had not immediately decoded. By the time she understood, the management arrangement was established, and the account was within the structure she oversaw. She had not told Margaret. She had not actively concealed the partnership, in the way that concealment requires intention, or rather, this is what her attorney argued, and it is an argument that contains some truth and some convenience. The truth part: Patricia had never formally hidden the partnership. The bank account existed. The quarterly deposits were recorded. A thorough forensic accounting would have found them. The convenience part, she had not mentioned them when Margaret asked about the estate, had not included them in the asset schedule, had characterized the pharmacy investment as something that didn't amount to anything, a characterization that was, on the numbers, wrong by $1.62 million. Margaret has not spent significant time on the question of Patricia's intent. She is a compliance analyst. She works in an environment where intent is often less legally relevant than outcome, where the question is not whether the person meant to create a compliance violation, but whether a compliance violation occurred. The outcome in this case was clear. The partnership interest had not been disclosed, it had been characterized as negligible, and it had been left for the padded envelope to surface. The intent behind those choices was Patricia's to understand, and Margaret's to let go of. Eventually, she is working on the letting go. It is not fast work. It is the kind of work that proceeds at the pace of grief, which is not a steady or predictable pace, but which does, over time, move forward. Let me tell you about Barbara Cheng, because she deserves more space than she has been given. Barbara is 61 years old and has been the managing partner of Keystone Pharmacy Partners for 30 years, which means she has managed the partnership through Robert's entire tenure as a limited partner. She is, by the account of everyone who works with her, a precise and forthcoming woman, the kind of business person who believes that clarity in business relationships prevents the complications that ambiguity creates, and who has, over 30 years, built a partnership that has survived multiple economic cycles by maintaining exactly that clarity. She had known Robert well, in the specific way of people who have been in a long-term business relationship with someone, not intimately, not personally in the details of life sense, but professionally with the accumulated understanding that comes from decades of annual meetings and quarterly reports and occasional calls about the partnership's strategic direction. She had known him as a careful man who asked good questions and held his positions without anxiety. She had respected him. When he died, she had attended the funeral, where she had spoken briefly to Patricia and had expected in the following weeks to be contacted by the estate attorney about the succession. When the contact had not come, she had asked Vincent to send the envelope. She was not angry at Patricia, exactly. She understood the situation with the pragmatic equanimity of someone who has been in business for 30 years and has seen every category of human behavior that business relationships produce. She had seen silent partners whose families did not know about the partnership. She had seen estates in which business interests were omitted from the disclosure, for reasons ranging from innocent oversight to deliberate concealment. She had developed the practice of maintaining the succession documentation with meticulous accuracy, precisely because she understood that the succession clause would sometimes need to do work that the family conversation had failed to do. She filed her declaration in the orphans' court, proceeding with the same directness she brought to quarterly reports, the facts, in order with the supporting documentation. She stated Robert's long history as a partner, the date of the succession designation update, the language of the clause, and the partnership's position that the succession was clear and that Keystone had no authority to delay it pending a probate dispute. She stated these things not as advocacy, but as record, and the court used the record as courts use clear records, as a basis for a clear decision. After the succession was confirmed, Barbara called Margaret directly. She introduced herself, they had not spoken before, and she said, "I wanted you to know that your father was a good partner. 30 years. He never missed an annual meeting. He asked the best questions." Margaret thanked her. Barbara said, He updated your name in the succession clause the summer he turned 72. He called me to arrange it. He said, I want to make sure it's in order. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She said, he didn't tell me. Barbara said, he didn't tell me why he didn't tell you. He just said he wanted it in order. Margaret said, he always wanted things in order. Barbara said, yes, he did. Margaret has thought about that conversation many times. He called Barbara to arrange the update. He went to Vincent's office to sign it. He ensured the document was current and the succession was clear. He did all of this at 72, which is the age when you are not ignoring the question of what happens after you are gone, but are making deliberate decisions about it. He made a deliberate decision. He named his daughter. He trusted the document to carry the decision forward. He did not explain this to Margaret. He did not explain it to Patricia. He explained it to the document. And the document explained it to the padded envelope. And the padded envelope arrived 3 weeks after his death. That is how Robert Sato said the things he did not say aloud. That is the language he had learned from parents who understood that legal instruments speak clearly and permanently in a way that conversation cannot always match. He was his parents' son in this specific respect. He passed the understanding on to his daughter, not in words, but in the succession clause on page 14. Margaret thinks about this when she walks past the pharmacy building. She thinks, he knew this place. He built something from it. He left it for me without telling me he was leaving it. He trusted that I would understand what he meant. She does understand. She is still learning the full meaning of it, the way you learn the full meaning of a document you have read once and need to read again and again until all of it is clear. She will read the whole partnership agreement eventually. She will understand all of it. She is her father's daughter, after all, and she does not leave documents unread. Let me tell you about the procedural period in more detail, because the Orphans Court proceedings had a texture that matters to the story. Vincent Lau is a careful attorney. He had been the partnership's attorney of record for 20 years. He had come to Keystone when the partnership's previous attorney retired, and he had maintained the documentation with the same methodical precision that Robert had maintained his own files. He had known Robert professionally for those 20 years and had the specific regard for him that attorneys sometimes develop for clients who are organized and clear and do not require hand-holding. Robert had been a pleasure to work with precisely because he understood what documents were for and treated them accordingly. When Vincent had first met Margaret, the morning after she called him from the padded envelope, he had recognized something in her professional bearing that he associated with her father. The same attentive precision, the same habit of asking the clarifying question rather than the emotional one, the same containment of the personal within the professional frame of a meeting. He had thought, she is going to be fine. He had been correct. He had managed the succession filing with the efficiency of someone who had the documents in order before the phone rang. The succession notice was filed with Keystone and the Pennsylvania Department of State within 48 hours of their initial meeting. The statutory authority was cited correctly. The timeline was within the partnership agreement's specified parameters. He had, in a practical sense, been waiting 3 weeks to do this work, and he did it quickly once he had Margaret's authorization. Patricia's objection, when it came, was not a surprise. Vincent had anticipated it. He had prepared the response in advance, the Pennsylvania statute, the case law on non-probate transfers, Barbara's declaration, and had filed it within the response period without urgency. The legal position was clear. The outcome was predictable. The question was only how long Patricia's attorney would pursue the matter before concluding that the pursuit was not productive. The answer was, until the hearing. Patricia's attorney was doing his job, which was to pursue every available argument in his client's interest. Vincent respected this without having any reason to expect the outcome would change. He had presented the case in writing, in the declaration, in the statutory analysis, and he had let the documents do what documents do when they are clear, accumulate authority that is difficult to argue against. The 2-week continuance that the Orphans' Court granted for discovery was the part of the proceedings that Margaret found most difficult. Not because of what the discovery might produce, but because the 2 weeks were 2 weeks of uncertainty that extended the period between learning what her father had done and having it formally confirmed. She had not thought of herself as an impatient person. She understood in the abstract that legal proceedings take time and that the time is part of the process. She discovered, during those 2 weeks, that understanding a thing intellectually and tolerating it practically are different experiences. She went to work each day. She reviewed pharmaceutical compliance documentation with the attention her work required. She answered calls from Vincent when they came, and did not call him when they did not. She did not speak to Patricia again. She did not speak to Patricia's family, none of whom she had ever been close to in the years of the marriage. She ate dinner and went to bed at reasonable hours, and walked to the coffee shop in the morning, and managed her days with the competence that does not require steady internal experience to maintain its outward consistency. She thought about her father. Not in extended meditation sessions, she is not that kind of person, but in the small recurring thoughts that accompany the ordinary activities of a day, doing dishes, walking to work, reviewing a page of regulatory language that required a particular kind of careful reading. The thoughts were not sad, exactly. They were more like conversation, or the attempt at conversation with someone who has said something significant by action rather than by word, and whose meaning you are still in the process of understanding. He had named her. He had named her in a document, specifically and deliberately, and he had updated the document years into his second marriage, and he had not mentioned it. He had trusted the document to be sufficient. He had trusted her to read it when it arrived. She reads documents. She has spent her professional life reading them with precision. She had been ready to receive this one, even without knowing it was coming. The hearing itself was not a long proceeding. The Orphans' Court judge was familiar with the Pennsylvania non-probate transfer statute and had reviewed the partnership agreement and the case law in advance. The argument was made, the documents were presented, the declaration was in the record. When Patricia's attorney said we withdraw the objection, the judge confirmed the succession in a sentence. It was one sentence. 30 years of Robert's investment, 3 weeks of the padded envelopes journey, 2 weeks of a continuance, and the succession was confirmed in one sentence by a judge in a warm courtroom in Allegheny County on a November afternoon. Vincent came out and found Margaret in the hallway. She asked if it was done. He said it was. She said he knew. He said he did. She did not ask more questions. She already had what she needed. The drive back to Squirrel Hill was ordinary. The Pittsburgh streets were the Pittsburgh streets. The specific topography of a city built on hills and rivers, the neighborhoods nestled in valleys and climbing slopes, the bridges and the industry and the residential density that make Pittsburgh one of the more geographically distinctive American cities. She drove through it without needing to navigate, in the way of people who know a place in their body as much as their memory. She parked in front of her apartment building and sat in the car for a moment before going up. She was thinking about the account at the regional bank, the same bank where Robert had deposited his quarterly distributions for 30 years. The same bank where she had opened her succession account, where the distributions would now arrive. She thought about Robert making those deposits for 30 years. She thought about what 30 years of quarterly deposits feel like from the inside, whether you think about them, whether they accumulate toward anything in your imagination, or whether they are simply what they are, evidence that the investment has continued, proof that the partnership is generating what it was designed to generate. She thought, he went to the bank every quarter for 30 years. He deposited the check. He wrote it down in his account book. He did not think about me when he deposited it. Probably, or maybe he did, toward the end, when he was thinking about the succession clause and what it meant. Maybe the last few years of quarterly deposits felt different to him. Maybe he deposited them with the knowledge that they were building toward an envelope that would arrive 3 weeks after his death. She did not know. She could not know. He had not told her. But she had the document. And the document told her what the deposit was for. There is something I want to tell you about the distribution and what Margaret did with it. The first check arrived as a direct deposit notification on a Thursday morning in January, 62 days after the succession was confirmed, within the partnership agreement's 60-day window. $38,400 from Keystone Pharmacy Partners to the account at the regional bank in Squirrel Hill. She looked at the notification on her phone at her desk at work. She looked at it for a long time. Then, she put the phone in her desk drawer and went back to the compliance document she had been reviewing. She is not a person who makes decisions quickly about money. She had not yet decided what the distributions meant to her future, whether they changed her plans, whether she should adjust her retirement contributions or her saving strategy, whether she should consult a financial planner about the implications of a significant recurring income stream that she had not anticipated. She knew these were questions she needed to answer. She also knew she was not ready to answer them with the clarity they deserved, because she was still in the part of the grief and the inheritance where the emotional meaning was not fully settled, and she did not want to make financial decisions while the emotional accounting was still open. She put the $38,400 in the succession account and let it sit. She put the subsequent distributions there too as they arrived. She reviews the account balance occasionally with the same professional attention she brings to any financial record, noting the figures, confirming the expected amounts, satisfying herself that the partnership is performing as described. She does not touch the money. She is not yet ready. She will be, eventually. She will make thoughtful decisions about it. And those decisions will reflect the values she has about money, similar values, she suspects, to the ones her father had, deliberate, patient, designed for the long term. She has thought about what her father built. Not the pharmacy, which is now a coffee shop, but the partnership investment that is now hers. He put money in 30 years ago and let it grow and named her as the beneficiary and waited. He did not perform the investment. He did not mention it at family dinners. He did not create expectations around it. He simply maintained it, quietly, and kept the succession clause current, and trusted the document to carry the intention forward at the right time. She is doing the same thing now. She is maintaining the account. She is attending the annual Keystone meetings, which she began attending in the spring following her succession. Barbara Chang had invited her specifically, said it was important for the new partner to understand the business. Margaret had sat in the annual meeting for the first time and listened to the financial report and asked 2 questions. both of which Barbara had described afterward as excellent. Margaret had thought, this is what he did for 30 years. He sat in this meeting and asked good questions. She had felt, in the annual meeting, something that was not grief, but was close to it, the specific feeling of being in a space where someone you loved was also present at a different time, doing the same thing you are doing now, and understanding them better for it. She will be a good partner. She is already learning to be. She asks the questions Robert would have asked, partly because she is his daughter, and partly because she is a compliance analyst who understands how to read financial reports with precision. Barbara notices this. At the second annual meeting, Barbara said, "You ask the same questions he asked." "Better, actually," Margaret said. "He was better at it than me." Barbara said, "You'll catch up." She thinks she might. The partnership agreement is still on the shelf in the padded envelope above her desk. She has looked at more of it now, through page 20, as of the most recent reading. The document is thorough. Robert had negotiated good terms 30 years ago, with the patience of someone who understood that the terms he set at the beginning would govern the relationship for decades. He had been right about the terms. He had been right about the investment. He had been right about her name in the succession clause. She has one more thing she wants to understand, why he kept it quiet during his life. She is building a theory. She thinks he may have been protecting the investment from family complexity, from the possibility that knowledge of the partnership would create expectations, discussions, pressures that he preferred not to manage. He was a private man. He kept his financial life private. The partnership was his business, in the most literal sense, and he had always treated his business as a domain that was his to manage without committee. But she also thinks there is a simpler explanation. He was the kind of father who shows love through reliable provision rather than announcement. He did not say "I love you" frequently. He said it through presence, through being at the pharmacy and being at the dinner table, and being at Kennywood every summer, and being at her college graduation, and being at the other significant events, with the steady consistency of someone who understands that being there is the verb that matters. And then, when being there was no longer possible, he arranged for the document to be there instead, carrying the thing he could not say in person to a person who would know how to read it. She knows how to read it. She is her father's daughter. She reads documents carefully, and she keeps them in the right place, and she makes decisions about money slowly and with deliberation, and she goes to the annual meetings and asks the questions that need to be asked. She is a partner now. She is the quiet kind, the kind that attends the meetings and reads the reports and holds her position without anxiety and trusts that the investment will do what it was designed to do. This seems right to her. It seems like the thing her father would recognize as the correct continuation of what he built. She walks past the coffee shop on her way to work some mornings. The window is the same. The building is the same. The light is the same kind of Pittsburgh morning light that it always was. She looks at it when she passes. She does not linger. She does not need to. She is carrying what he left her. She is managing it with care. That is what she has to give him. Now that the conversations they might have had are no longer possible, the same quality of attention he gave to what he built continued forward. She thinks he would have found that sufficient. 1 week after the succession was confirmed, Barbara Chang called Margaret with a question she had not anticipated. The partnership's books showed a related party transaction from 18 months earlier, a wire transfer of $71,000 to an account labeled Sato Family Trust. Barbara had assumed when the transaction occurred that Robert had authorized it, but the trust account name was not one that appeared in any of Robert's partnership documentation. And Barbara had not been asked for any confirmation of the transfer at the time it occurred. Now that the succession had changed who held Robert's interest, the transaction required clarification before the next distribution cycle. Margaret said, "Robert didn't have a family trust." Barbara said, "That's why I'm calling." Margaret took the information to Vincent. Vincent reviewed the partnership records and confirmed the transfer, $71,000, 18 months ago, from the partnership's distribution account to an external account in the name Sato Family Trust. The transfer had been authorized by the signature on Robert's account correspondence. Vincent said, "I need to trace the account." The trace is underway. Margaret has set it aside in the way she sets aside things that require time and professional attention that she has not yet had the capacity to give. She has flagged it. She has confirmed with Vincent that he is on it. She trusts him to find what there is to find, and she will respond when he does. She is not alarmed by this. She is a compliance analyst. She knows that financial anomalies, when found, require investigation and resolution, and that the investigation and resolution take time, and that the correct approach to an open question is to open the file and close it properly. She has opened the file. She will close it properly. In the meantime, she goes to work. She attends the quarterly meetings. She reads the distribution reports with the precision her father would have recognized as correct. She is building, from the beginning, the same kind of informed, patient relationship with the partnership that Robert built over 30 years. She is going to do it well. She is ready to hold what he left. That is the whole of the inheritance he gave her. The document and the confidence it expressed. Thank you for listening today. Leave your city in the comments. I love knowing where these stories travel. And if this made you think of a conversation with a parent you have been putting off, please have it. Don't wait for the envelope. I'll see you next time.